Hello, I'm Craig Toder, and I have been part of this fine organization since around 1981. Started part-time, uh, led into a full-time position after about 2 years. Came in as a salesperson with no engineering background. Uh, but one of the first people I met when I came to the company was Joe Baruzzini, and of course Jim Heisserer, my associate here. We're the two oldest
The elders.
elders of the, and we actually don't have our name on the company, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Should be Heiser and Toder, or Toder and Heiser, but it's Ross and Baruzzini. But we did get some parking spots out of this
Yes,
deal,
yeah, we did.
right?
We did. We sure did. Sure did.
So uh, when I came to the company, Joe Baruzzini was thinking about retiring, and he had already had a career that was about 20 years in with Don Ross as a partner, as the mechanical partner of the company. And I think he was at a point in his life where he had never married. He was taking care of his elderly mother. Remember that?
Hmm.
And I think he just wanted to experience his life outside of work. And so he was ready to retire at the time I came in. But what was unique about that situation was I probably worked with Joe for maybe 6 months to a year, off and on at Ross and Baruzzini, and learned to really understand the man. And I learned to really love him because he was such a sweet person. And so when he fully retired, he and I got together. We found that we had a love of old cars, just cars in general, but especially old cars, antique cars. So he and I bought with Don Ross our first vintage car that I could barely afford, and we had that for several years. Then Joe and I got adventurous, and we bought a car that needed a total restoration. And we bought it in boxes and buckets and pieces, thousands of pieces. And we took 3 years in his garage to build that car back, and we had a great experience doing it. But every minute that I spent with him, I treasured because he was such a sweet man, and thoughtful and wonderful. And it's funny because before I even met him, my wife said to me that when you meet Joe Baruzzini, there's an interesting story in our family about him, which is every year when she was growing up, Joe Baruzzini pretended to be Santa Claus, and he would call her right before Christmas and see if she was a good girl, and check her gift list and all that sort of thing, and talk to her like Santa Claus. And she really thought he was Santa Claus until she was probably 20 years old. But she said, "You're gonna like Joe Baruzzini."
Well, I'm Jim Heiser, and I've been here for a pretty long time. I started in 1976, and the year I was born, 1953, is when Don Ross started his company. So that kind of tells you how old I am. But when I started, I guess there was probably 10 or 15 people here at most, maybe. And then, as the years went by, we got bigger and bigger, and I would see Joe. At that time, I was, on the drafting board like the rest of us, and I'd see Joe come out of his office and talk to the mechanical engineers, and he was very meticulous. He was the engineer's engineer, and quite a good one. And I would hear those conversations on the mechanical side, and I was just a junior draftsman starting out, and I knew there was a lot of education there, a lot of high-level discussions going on, and so I got to know Joe somewhat, not to the extent you did, but I I really respected him like Don Ross, and it's one of those things that as you look back, you realize that people that helped you get to where you are now and what they did to help train you. And Joe was one of those guys that, he would sit down with the mechanical engineers, even though I wasn't part of that group since I'm electrical. But, you have to respect a man like that. And I know there was a decent and very good relationship between those two guys running the company. And you know, I wish I had more stories, but I just didn't really interact as much with Joe as everybody else did. But I was there, and I don't remember the year he retired. It was, I guess,
I'm gonna say 83.
83 or so. So,
84.
you know, for a number
Right
of
there.
years, I, you know, got to see how the office worked with him. And when he left, there was a gap for a while.
Yeah.
There definitely was,
No
you know,
question.
when somebody of that level, you know, retires. So, you know, again, looking back on it, you know, I thank God for all the wonderful people that helped train me, and Joe was, you know, a part of that like everybody else. So.